General Hospital will reveal Molly had never imagined that the love she once held so deeply for Christina could one day curdle into such a profound and unforgiving hatred. There had been moments. Brief flickers in time, when the two sisters seemed on the cusp of rebuilding their fractured bond. Glimmers of forgiveness had begun to shine through the cracks of betrayal. And for a fleeting second, Molly believed reconciliation might be possible. But all of that hope disintegrated the instant she learned the truth, that it was Christina who had caused the horrific accident that left both Rick and Elizabeth gravely injured. The news shattered Molly. It was as if the very core of her world had been ripped apart once again. Rick had never been a perfect father, but he was still her father. More than that. He was the only remaining thread of stability in her life after the chaos Christina had brought into it. From the devastating betrayal over the surrogacy, when Christina had agreed to carry a child for Molly and then plotted to keep the baby for herself, to the heartbreaking death of baby Irene. Christina's actions had already taken too much. And now, Rick's blood was on her hands. This time, Molly didn't rage. She didn't scream or cry. She went silent, and cold. That silence was more dangerous than any outburst, because it gave way to something far more calculated. A plan, forged from betrayal and grief, began to take shape within her. There would be no confrontation, no emotional appeals. Molly was done listening to Christina's apologies, her tears, her claims of regret. None of it mattered anymore. The time for understanding was over. The time for justice, true justice, had come. As Assistant District Attorney, Molly knew the law. She also knew the boundaries of her professional ethics. And she respected them, on the surface. She formally recused herself from the case and transferred it to ADA Turner, ensuring there was no conflict of interest. But behind the scenes, she worked with quiet determination to push the case forward. She made sure every piece of evidence was uncovered, every witness thoroughly interviewed. She ensured that no detail, no matter how minor, slipped through the cracks. Christina had made a choice, and now she would face the consequences, both legally and personally. But it wasn't just about a courtroom verdict. Molly needed Christina to feel the full weight of the pain she had inflicted. She wanted her sister to sit alone in a cell and understand what it meant to destroy the people you claim to love. Christina had stolen so much from her, her child, her peace of mind, her family's safety, and now, Molly would reclaim that power by making sure she paid for every single sin. In Molly's heart, forgiveness had long since died. And in its place grew a cold, unshakable resolve to see Christina brought down, not just by the law, but by the unbearable burden of her own guilt. However, Molly was not alone in her journey toward vengeance. By her side stood TJ. The man she trusted above all others, the one person who had witnessed the full extent of her suffering and had remained her rock through every betrayal, every heartbreak, and every loss. TJ, ever the voice of reason, had initially tried to be a calming presence. But even his compassion had its limits, and Christina had long since crossed the line. He, too, had reached a point where forgiveness no longer seemed like a viable option. What Christina had done was not just a mistake, it was a deliberate, selfish act that had cost them their future as a family. The pain Molly endured during the surrogacy nightmare, the devastation of losing baby Irene, and now, the violent accident that left Rick clinging to life, none of it could be excused. Together, Molly and TJ began to chart a course for justice, not out of spite, but out of a desperate need for accountability. Yet, as they began peeling back the layers of the incident, they discovered something that shifted the trajectory of their plan entirely. A disturbing truth began to take form: Christina had not acted alone. Another name began to surface amid the chaos. One that neither of them had initially considered: Ava. Molly's suspicions were first aroused by the inconsistencies in Christina's statements and the strange tension that had surrounded her interactions with Ava in the weeks leading up to the accident. As she began retracing her sister's steps and revisiting security footage, digital logs, and witness accounts, a new narrative emerged, one that pointed to Ava's subtle but sinister influence. Ava hadn't been behind the wheel that night, nor had she orchestrated the accident directly, but her fingerprints were all over the events that led to it. It became increasingly clear that Ava had played a manipulative role in Christina's downward spiral. She had fed Christina's insecurities, stoked her resentment, and planted seeds of poisonous entitlement. Under Ava's guidance, Christina began to believe she had the right to control the child she was carrying, to dictate Molly's future, and ultimately, to exact revenge for perceived wrongs. It was Ava who had whispered justifications into Christina's ear, cloaking toxic decisions in the language of empowerment. And when things began to unravel, it was Ava who retreated into the shadows, ensuring that Christina would be the one to take the fall. Molly and TJ soon realized that the accident, and the death of baby Irene, had not been the result of one reckless sister, but the product of calculated manipulation. Ava had set the stage for disaster, all to protect herself from a secret Christina had discovered, one that could have ruined her. That secret, whatever it was, had driven Ava to desperation, and in her desperation, she had used Christina as a pawn. What had begun as a plan to see Christina prosecuted evolved into something deeper, more dangerous. Now, it was no longer just about justice. It was about exposing a deeper truth. Molly and TJ knew that taking down Ava would require more than legal maneuvering, it would demand cunning, strategy, and an unflinching willingness to confront a woman who had made a career out of escaping accountability. With steely resolve, the couple moved forward. They began compiling evidence, digging into Ava's past dealings, and speaking to those who had been burned by her before. If Ava thought she had buried her tracks, she was wrong. This time, she wouldn't walk away unscathed. This time, Molly and TJ would make sure she paid for every whispered lie, every manipulated conversation, and every life she helped destroy, starting with baby Irene's. Without hesitation, Molly and TJ launched a calculated and methodical plan to expose Ava and bring her to justice. Gone were the days of quiet speculation and unspoken anger, now came the time for strategy and precision. They both understood that Ava wasn't just a manipulative woman with a shady past, she was an expert at evading consequences, adept at weaving lies into truths, and skilled at cloaking her intentions behind layers of charisma and power. If they wanted to take her down, they would need more than suspicions and emotional grievances, they would need irrefutable evidence, the kind that no lawyer could spin, no connection could bury, and no reputation could survive. They started with the basics. Molly turned to her legal contacts while TJ leveraged his access to the hospital's internal systems and networks. As a respected doctor, TJ had access to staff logs, medical reports, and even restricted surveillance feeds that had once been dismissed as irrelevant. Together, they created a map, an intricate, web-like timeline of Ava's interactions in the weeks leading up to the crash and the death of baby Irene. They identified patterns, cross-referenced phone records, and highlighted inconsistencies in Ava's whereabouts. The more they dug, the more troubling the picture became. One of the first major red flags came from the hotel security logs. Molly, with help from a friend in the legal department, discovered that Ava had been meeting Christina at odd hours in a downtown hotel, a place known for its discretion and lack of formal surveillance policies. However, what caught their attention was not just the meetings, but what followed. Several recordings from the hotel's hallway cameras had been mysteriously deleted in the days surrounding the accident. Molly filed a quiet motion to retrieve backup data from the security company's server, and after some persistence, they managed to recover fragments of video footage that had been previously lost. The footage was damning. In one clip, Ava could be seen leaving the hotel room in a rush, clearly agitated, while Christina remained inside, visibly shaken and distressed. The timestamp matched precisely with the day Christina's behavior took a dramatic turn, when she began lashing out, growing paranoid, and retreating from those closest to her. Something had happened in that hotel room. Something Ava had said or done had changed the course of everything. Molly and TJ didn't stop there. They began digging into Ava's financial records. Flagging wire transfers to unknown accounts, cash transactions that coincided with key events, and meetings with individuals who had long been under the radar of law enforcement. Every piece of information uncovered another layer of deceit. Ava had been making payments to a private investigator, one who had been tailing Christina and Molly during the height of the surrogacy scandal. It was a chilling revelation. Ava had been watching them, gathering leverage long before the accident ever occurred. TJ, with his medical expertise, also found discrepancies in Christina's medical chart. On the night of the accident, Christina had been under severe emotional distress. Her cortisol levels and vital signs were erratic, according to the ER intake records. But what stood out was a trace of an unusual sedative in her system, one that could impair judgment and increase impulsivity. The source of the sedative wasn't documented, no prescription, no explanation. It was subtle, almost invisible to the untrained eye. But TJ knew better. The dosage was too precise to be accidental. They began to suspect that Ava may have drugged Christina to push her over the edge, knowing full well it could lead to tragedy. Together, Molly and TJ assembled a war chest of evidence, documents, footage, medical records, witness statements, and timelines. They weren't just building a case, they were constructing an airtight narrative. One that would expose Ava's role not only in manipulating Christina but in orchestrating the entire chain of events that led to the death of baby Irene and the near-fatal accident that followed. They worked late into the nights, often in silence, consumed by the weight of their mission. What had started as a quest for justice had become something deeper, a reckoning. Ava had played with the lives of their family, used their grief and vulnerability as tools, and thought she could walk away untouched. But now, for the first time, the walls were closing in. Molly and TJ would make sure of it. And then, the opportunity finally presented itself. After weeks of tireless digging, cross-referencing records, and pushing beyond locked digital doors, Molly and TJ uncovered what would become the linchpin in their case against Ava, a hidden surveillance video buried deep within the encrypted servers of the hotel where Ava and Christina had frequently met. The footage had been deliberately concealed, marked under an unrelated time stamp and mislabeled to avoid detection. It was only through sheer determination and Molly's legal maneuvering that the file was recovered at all. What the video revealed left no doubt. Ava had been present at the hotel just hours before the devastating accident. The footage, grainy but clear enough to capture expressions and gestures, showed Ava and Christina locked in a heated argument just outside the door of the hotel suite. Their voices were not audible, but their body language said everything. Christina was visibly agitated, her hands trembling, her face pale with confusion and fury. Ava, on the other hand, was cold, calculated. She leaned in close, whispering something to Christina that caused her to recoil in horror. Ava's final glance before storming away was chilling, a look that could only be described as a threat wrapped in a smile. Moments later, the footage cut to Christina leaving the room alone. Her posture was tense, her eyes distant, as if she had just experienced something deeply traumatic. Less than 2 hours after that moment, Christina got behind the wheel in a volatile state of mind. Her judgment impaired, her emotions raw. That drive ended in disaster, a crash that left Rick and Elizabeth fighting for their lives and confirmed every one of Molly's darkest fears. But Molly didn't hand over the footage immediately. No, she knew better than to act on impulse. She understood that a weapon this powerful had to be wielded with precision. Ava, ever cunning, had already begun to present herself as the victim of circumstances, distancing herself from Christina and subtly aligning herself with those who had influence and power. She walked through Port Charles with renewed confidence, convinced that the worst had passed, that her name was no longer being whispered behind closed doors. That's exactly what Molly wanted. She kept the footage locked away, protected and untouched, biding her time. She continued to monitor Ava's movements, noting every smug interaction, every false smile. Every quiet conversation in corners where Ava thought no one was watching. Molly wanted Ava to feel safe, to feel invincible, because only then would the truth cut deepest. The moment Ava believed she had escaped unscathed, the moment she believed the storm had passed, was the moment Molly would strike. She envisioned it clearly. Presenting the video as irrefutable proof, not just of Ava's presence, but of her emotional manipulation and veiled threats that directly preceded the tragedy. The footage alone wouldn't convict Ava of a crime in the legal sense, but in the court of public opinion, in the eyes of those who once trusted her, it would be a death sentence. It would fracture her alliances, expose her true nature, and destroy the carefully curated facade she had built. TJ supported Molly's decision to wait. Understanding that justice was not just about swift action, it was about making it count. Together, they honed their strategy, tightening the net around Ava. Preparing the perfect moment to unveil the truth. And until that moment arrived, the video remained under lock and key, a silent witness to Ava's cruelty. A ticking time bomb that Molly was ready to detonate. Molly was no longer the soft-spoken little sister who once clung to the hope of reconciliation. The girl who used to believe that love could heal all wounds, that understanding could mend even the deepest betrayals, had been irrevocably changed. The events that had unfolded over the past year had stripped away her innocence, layer by painful layer. The death of baby Irene had crushed her spirit in a way that no words could fully capture. It was a loss that carved itself into the deepest corners of her soul, a future that had been stolen, a life never lived, a piece of her heart forever gone. Then came the accident, the horrific moment when Rick, her father, was rushed into emergency surgery, his body broken. His life hanging in the balance because of a decision Christina had made in a moment of emotional chaos. It was the final blow. Any last fragments of sympathy Molly might have held for her sister. Any desire to forgive, died the moment she saw Rick lying unconscious, surrounded by machines that barely kept him alive. Something inside her had frozen. She no longer trusted apologies. She no longer found comfort in words of remorse or promises of change. In Molly's eyes, redemption was a lie people told themselves to sleep better at night. Justice, in its purest form, was no longer a concept she studied in books or argued about in courtrooms. It had become personal, visceral. It meant consequences. Real, painful consequences. Not lectures. Not second chances. But accountability so severe it mirrored the agony of the damage inflicted. And for her, that meant only one outcome. The people responsible for her suffering had to feel the same pain they had caused her. Christina would face the law. Molly had already set those wheels in motion. Using her knowledge of the system not to protect her sister, but to ensure the system held her accountable. But there was another person, more dangerous, more manipulative. More calculating, who had walked freely for far too long. Ava. Ava thought she could manipulate everyone around her, wrap people in her charm. Deflect guilt with ease and walk away from disaster untouched. She had done it before, countless times, always slipping through the cracks. Always emerging with her reputation intact and her hands washed clean. But not this time. Not with Molly. Molly had watched Ava carefully. She had studied her patterns, listened to her lies. Observed the way she turned victims into villains and painted herself as the wounded party. But now, Molly saw through it all. She saw the truth beneath the surface, the coldness, the selfishness. The hunger for control masked behind a veneer of sophistication and poise. And she was done watching. No longer motivated by anger alone. Molly had become something far more dangerous than emotional, she had become determined. Methodical. Patient. She knew justice didn't always come quickly. But it came eventually to those who had the strength to pursue it without blinking. Ava would learn that truth. Not with a dramatic confrontation. Not with shouting matches or slaps across the face, but through slow, calculated exposure. Through truth that couldn't be denied. Through consequences that couldn't be avoided. Because in the end, Molly believed that real justice wasn't about redemption. It was about balance. And Ava had tipped the scales too far for too long. Her reckoning was coming. And when it did, Ava would finally understand what it meant to lose everything she thought she had gotten away with.